Um, on, of course.
Okay.
Greetings. This is TK Trav, aka Travis Magus, here with LVX777. Today we're going to talk about healing and shadow work, as that is certainly the energy that's happening today. I know that most all of us who are currently employed in some type of self-development are feeling that there are a lot of scenarios in our lives and a lot of people in our lives that have been an issue start to fall away. And of course, there are others who aren't involved in spiritual work. And for them, they seem to be pulled down with those things that they're not releasing. So it's important to understand where these issues originate from, right? Nothing begins on the outside, nothing begins in the environment. It all comes through as manifestations of what our inner harmony is like, what our inner harmony is reflecting into the environment, or the lack thereof. So in any case, I'm here tonight talking with Alora. Good evening.
Hi.
And we're going to discuss some things that you've heard of, and also some things that you haven't heard of. Certainly some things that I haven't heard of. But yeah, what if the tools for healing and the tools for elevation aren't hidden away in some book, but have always been in our vicinity? So let's talk about that a little bit. How are you this evening, Alora?
I'm doing great. Yeah. How are you?
Doing pretty well. Kind of just woke up, so I think I'll catch up with you soon. So yeah, I guess we'll kind of get right into it. You were talking with me about some type of vibrational healing, I guess is what I would call it. What is the official name for it, from you?
So it's called holographic memory resolution. It's a form of hypnotherapy that is gaining more popularity in alternative healing, but also in clinical healing because of the effects that it's having. It's essentially the idea that emotions are held in the body and subtle patterns and behaviors are expressed. And on a subconscious level, when we access whatever those points are in the body, we can then release and change them. So, destructive pattern or something that we've been repeating for years and years and years, we can find out where we feel it in our body, and then observe it, go back to the memory of how old we were when it happened, and then release it from there and actually change the picture. It works along it works very much in harmony with neuroscience when they talk about because the study of neuroscience is of course like how our brain maps emotion, and emotion we often feel like is reacting from external things that are occurring, but in actuality our emotions are trying to predict what will happen next. And the way that it does that is by bringing up what's happened in the past, the impressions that we've gotten. So, for example, if I hold up my fingers like this, your mind is probably going to think of some type of square or rectangle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or even better yet, if I do it like this. But there isn't any physical lines there, there's just my two fingers. Your brain is making up the rest to make a shape out of that. So it's automatic. So its job is to automatically use references to create a hallucination. We do this with memory all the time. And the thing about that is that when we have certain memories or certain things that occur to us in our brains make that relationship, we attach emotions to that and those become triggers, or certain things become triggers, and our emotions then try to predict what will happen next. Oh, for some reason, whenever I see red, I have this reaction. It's because we're assuming that invisible line is going to make the square. We're assuming that this
Hmm.
picture is going to play out. So if we look at that, holographic memory resolution essentially asks you, okay, where are you feeling this in your body? And what weight is it? What size is it? What color is it? What texture? How old do you think you might have been when this first came about? And you answer the first thing that comes to your head. So this is a direct line of communication with your subconscious to actually find out what it is that you're holding in your body, why this emotion, why this pattern, why this frequency is resonating at this point. And then once you identify what it is, what that memory is or what you're holding on to, what impression the subconscious mind is holding on to, you then change it. What would change this scene to something that you would actually want? And then you allow the subconscious mind to answer for that. And then you draw a frame around it. And this is where color therapy comes in. So you create a new scene and then you create a frame around that new scene. So once you have that frame, you look at what color that frame is, what texture it is, and then you absorb that color and texture from the frame into your body all throughout. And you'll find that you have rewired your system from the subconscious level. So now all of a sudden, that aspect or that memory that you had is your relationship to it has changed. So that resonance has changed. Your identification with that has changed. And the pattern that you've been repeating for so long is changing. So that's a therapy that I recently did. Um, and it's it's opened up a whole amazing realm of understanding what our subconscious is versus what we think is actually happening in our consciousness. But before like I go way into that, that's essentially in a nutshell what holographic memory resolution is. The hypnotherapy technique where you go inside the body and you it's the idea that if you can locate it in your body, if you can touch it, if you can feel it, if you can describe it, then you can change it. And then we implement colors to run through your body so then you change that scene and you rewire your system.
That sounds really cool. That it does actually remind me of a few techniques that I've used and I've studied. I just haven't heard it, classified as what you described. But what's amazing to me is that what you're describing isn't anything that's like crazy out of this world. Like it's literally going into the toolbox of the five senses and like looking at what's there and possibly reshaping it, but in an indirect way, right? Like you said, they would name a topic or a subject or an object, and then you'd speak about the first thing that comes to mind, and then you'd work with that and the building of the frame around it and the colors and everything. It's amazing because we don't think about how we do that process automatically.
Yeah,
And like what you said about the mind and emotions predicting, that's very key as well, because that really depends on the information that we have in store already. And if the information is not true or not useful or not appropriate, then our predictions will also be the same.
yeah, yeah. And it's so amazing that when you start actually breaking into what the subconscious holds on to. So your subconscious mind, you know when it's speaking because if you ask it a question, it's the first voice that answers. It's typically always honest. Doesn't mean that it's right, but it's honest. It's your top belief system. So it's going to be honest. Um, it sounds very distant, and the more distant it sounds, the deeper it is in your subconscious of what's coming up. Um, and there's uh, and there's some other things that like basically tell you it's the subconscious, right? So you gotta have to let it. Well, yeah, and you're always gonna want to edit it. That's the part that kind of during this experience really opened me up to that because the thing is that the way how the conscious mind thinks it's logging in information, the subconscious mind is logging it in a different way, a completely different way. So you're going to want to edit what it is that's coming out automatically because your conscious mind is going to say that doesn't make sense. Like why would that be a reaction? But it's so real to your subconscious mind. That's why like tapping into your imagination is absolutely huge because that is the language of the subconscious mind. It is through imagery, it is through sound, it is through these little instances that your conscious mind wasn't even aware of as a situation was happening, but your subconscious mind was downloading it. So I'll give an example. One of my one of the things that came up for me, I had a list of all of these songs, right? And I just like unloaded it on the therapist. I was like, this is what's going on. And she asked me certain questions about my history, and so I just unloaded all the story, right? Now, throughout that, she was picking up certain expressions I would use that had emotions attached to it. And she'd be like, okay, let me know which of of this list of words that you use and expressions that you use stick out to you the most. What sticks out to you the most? And so she'd read them one by one. And the one this time around that really stuck out to me was referring to myself as trash, used badly. And we went into that, right? And so I'm expecting like, okay, here we go. Now sometimes it does actually take you back to the place of the trauma when it happened and stuff. But for me, this is one of those instances where I just had to trust the subconscious and it was amazing how it cataloged it. So we did the whole thing. Where do you feel it in your body? I feel it in my stomach here. Okay. What is it? We describe it, that kind of stuff. How old do you think it happened? Do you when you first got this feeling? How old were you? I was 6. So 6 was before all of these traumas happened. All of these things that I cataloged in my mind. I was 6 when I first felt this feeling of being unworthy, of being trash, of, having that emotional connection. So when we went into it, we were like, okay, what is happening? And the picture that unfolded was that I was next to the playground in the field by myself, and I wanted to play fairies, and nobody wanted to play with me. They wanted to do something else, and I felt rejected. And so in that, the lesson that I had, so my current belief system was that I was too weird, that people didn't want to be with me. I wasn't wanted. So then the question was, okay, what would make this scene uh good for you? What would you want to change? I said, well, I would want to see a fairy. So so like I'm laughing through this, but at the same time I'm allowing my subconscious to answer it. So I'm like, all right, man, there's got to be fairies. Like so she was like, that's great. Yeah. So let's see these fairies and these fairies show up and stuff. How do you feel? And my first answer was, I feel I'm right. Like I am right as I am. Then we talked about the color of the fairies, right? Then we built a frame around that scene. Now, from the fairies, though, in the frame, we instilled all the colors, we observed all the colors, and then we brought them into my whole body, right? And it just resonated all throughout my body. I soaked it all in. And what was interesting that I also had noticed throughout that time was that when I was a little kid, I used to have imaginary fairy friends. I used to have imaginary friends. And over time, it became socially unacceptable to express that, to have that. So that was a part of my shadow self. That was a part of myself that I had shunned. And from that, a belief system of me being unworthy came up and started to cultivate itself. And then as experiences occurred down the road, right, that that belief started to compound on itself. Started saying, well, look, this is confirming this, and this is confirming this, and this is confirming this. And then it all built up into one big negative belief about myself. So that's one of the instances where I was totally expecting like to go into head first into one of these traumas and all that, and was brought back as a little kid to the school playground when I was first rejected, when people didn't want to play fairies with me. And my brain had categorized that and cataloged it as something's wrong with you.
Hmm.
So that was like one of the instances of where it was like, wow, I was repeating a pattern. My conscious mind was thinking it was this thing, but my subconscious mind had actually logged in this information way before and was playing that out.
One of the things that comes to mind when you talk about that, especially the last part with you being a little girl and you attempting to have fun with friends and they reject you, so to speak. I think that almost kind of shows how we have this innate ability to understand that our external environment is a reflection of our internal environment, right? Because when that happened, the natural instinct was to take that as a signal that this is what reality is.
Mhm. Right.
but but yeah, just looking at or listening to what you say, and like I'm visualizing this as you're talking, how deeply do our childhood experiences echo throughout our entire lives, especially when they're left unaddressed.
Yeah. And when we think about society, right, and how that's fine-tuned us in a certain way to have certain patterns of behaviors or to have fundamental belief systems. Because when we're kids, we're like sponges. We're soaking in everything. We don't know. We're building up our reference base, right? Like even in baby's brain, there's a our like main cortex center, right? It's spongy because it's building, it's there to form over time, to form memories, right, of this life. So then the baby, we can survive. So when we're young like that, that's kind of the fundamental starting point of where we're getting our references for, especially when it comes to our identity and if this world is safe or not. So that comes from environment, that comes from family, that comes from how we were nurtured, what we were nurtured with, and our subconscious mind, was categorizing and cataloging all of that, is our is our eyes, right? Like what we're seeing, what we're hearing, what we're tasting, what we're feeling. Um, like all of these VACOG, right? So like visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, and gustatory. So these are the senses that we're using that's gathering information and that's telling our nervous system like, hey, this place is cool or not. So it is like absolutely incredible how like we can think it's one situation and then realize that like, oh, since I was a kid, society, right? Or like the community I was in actually really affected me. And I didn't
Hmm.
know that.
Yeah, because another tendency of the mind is to grasp and grasp until we find an answer that seems suitable, regardless of whether or not it's the truth. So we often don't, hell, most of us don't ever sit with our feelings or with trying to find an actual solution to what we're facing. We grasp for what sounds good and makes us feel good right then and there. And that too can start to lead to belief systems that are not useful or appropriate.
Yeah. I think as well, people don't really know, we don't really know how to, or we can't believe that it's so simple, right? Like we have a really hard time Like I know for myself, the whole time my conscious mind was arguing with my subconscious. It was like, that doesn't make sense. Why are you now 12 on the street to your next door neighbor's house and you don't want to hang out with her, and all of a sudden you're feeling lonely again? Like, what? How does that have to do with your vision of empowerment? Everything.
Yeah,
You know?
it's it's that function that we work to put in its place, so to speak. It's that function of the mind that caused the misinterpretations of reality, right? I think that those of us who have a higher success rate in the things that we do, especially in spiritual work, I think those of us that have a higher success rate are those of us who can bypass that voice, who can bypass that voice more frequently. Because I know there's a lot of people, because I've done consultations, there's a lot of people like here in this community or in the spiritual community at large or whatever, who set up themselves to do the magic and to do the rituals, this, that, and the third, but that voice is still in there. You look stupid right now. This doesn't work. What are your parents going to think? You can't do this. Maybe it'll work for him or her, but it can't work for you. Like that voice, for some people, is stronger than the will to allow the magic to work. That's the killer right there.
Yeah. And I think you said a key word there is to allow, right? So like we set up ritual, we set up all this to put ourselves in a state, because when we're in a state, we can access certain parts of our subconscious, of what's beyond what we're seeing and feeling right now. But if we never get to that point where we even understand what that looks like or what that feels like, then we can do the correct ritual. We can use the right colored candles. We can use all of the kind of stuff, but we can never convince ourselves that it's going to work until we understand what allowing the process is, what allowing the subconscious mind to come through is, what that inner voice is. And I think a lot of people have that, they take the emotion for reality instead of seeing it as it is an expression of your frequency. So it is not reality. It is just the expression of the frequency. I mean, you can bypass trying to rationalize, oh, I'm feeling angry because blah, 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 all this kind of stuff, and start seeing it as a symptom. And instead being like, okay, where in my body am I feeling this? What does it look like? What color is it? What weight it is? You start asking yourself different questions, you start getting different answers. And then you get the root to what's really causing this feeling here. You may find out that it's your viewpoint of a situation that happened, or an impression that you had that your mind created in order to have the square, right? So like it was one of the dots that you tried to connect with, and you realize, okay, that's actually part of like the faultiness in this program here. So let me reprogram that real quick. And when you do that, your identity with everything changes. The square changes, the all of it changes, and you access real magic. That's when you access your real self, because you're actually in communication with your total self instead of just parts of it.
And those parts of it typically come about as a form of self-defense, as a form of protection, right? Just like the experience that you shared as a child, we all have experiences like that, where as a child we set out to do something or express our innocent childlike expression, and then we meet a response in the environment, and depending on how traumatic that response was or that event was, the response has the potential to section off that part of that innocent child who was reaching out, to section it off and to create a mask over it, to create a layer over it, to take that whole experience and redefine reality around it. And that's how those parts of us get locked up in these prisons in the subconscious mind. What movie was that? It was one of the Marvel movies where Charles Xavier went into I think it was, yeah, it was the Doctor Strange where he went into the Scarlet Witch's head, and he found like the real her was like locked in this basement, and like the dark hold or whatever had taken over. It's kind of like that, when we go through these experiences, that innocence starts to become sectioned off and covered and buried. It's still in there, right? It's at the core of who we are. Like you said, it's our core self. But for some of us, those layers are so thick that it damn near seems like the light is out.
Yeah. And so this is where in that mind body connection, you can relate this same kind of thing in a different type of analogy, right? We're talking about emotions being held in the body and so on and so forth. Like you said, this is a protection element for ourselves. This is where we need to give ourselves grace. It's not like, oh, that was wrong for us to have that reaction. No, that was us doing what we could in the moment. The thing about the reprogramming of it is that you're not saying it didn't happen. You're just telling yourself that we're no longer in that moment. We made it past that. Because the thing is that when we shut off that part of ourselves and we continue working, that part of ourselves is still frozen at that point in time. It is unable to move on. So a lot of us have a fear. I know for, like when talking about reprogramming and that kind of stuff, a lot of us have a fear of, well, how, that was something bad that happened. I need to be able to protect myself. Like that's something I don't want to give that up. That's not really the point of it. Yes, you learn from it and you survive it, right? But now it's time to unfreeze that part of yourself so it understands the difference between when we're in a space that we need to be that is unsafe and the present moment seems pretty safe. It doesn't, I don't have to be stuck at that point. What they found, so there's a really good book um, called The Body Keeps the Count. And it's about this psychologist who does a whole bunch of research and work with people who have severe traumas, like veterans who saw their best friend die in the field and then like rape and kill children, right? Like serious, serious traumas. And what they found was that the physical reaction in the body occurs as that person is telling their story, like it did when they were experiencing it. So, your body, most people will start to sweat, or they'll shorten their breath, or they'll have the same symptoms, the same reactions that they had in that moment that the trauma happened. That's the part of yourself that's unable to move on. It's unable to be in the present moment. So, when you are able to reprogram that and be like, yes, I survived, that's good, but now I can move forward, that's when you're actually able to learn the lesson, to fully process what happened and be able to let it go and grow as an individual. I think a lot of us get stuck with that. So, bringing it back to like one of the things like I do in massage, right? A lot of people come to me post surgery and they're like, man, I still have like this neck ache or whatever. I had a fusion hit in my lower back and stuff, and now I have nerve damage. A lot of that is due to scar tissue. And then what the person themselves do is after their body experiences a trauma like that, the body starts to create tissue to surround that area to protect it. And the person on an unconscious level is protecting that space. So all of a sudden they start walking differently. They start moving differently than what they did. They start adding on more limitations to what they have to do. So the body stops moving in the way that it's supposed to where recovery can actually take place. Now your hips are locking up. Now you can't feel what's going on in your legs anymore. There's a whole bunch of chain reactions that happen in the body because the body is still responding and living in that moment of stress when it was cut open. This is, and I get a lot of women who have gone through a divorce and they call it divorce neck because it's just full of rock like tissue in there. And it's from doing this, it's from being tension. And if you think about it too on a metaphysical thing, right? On a metaphysical point, your neck is your vulnerable point. So a lot of people who feel shame or are slouched, typically they bring their head down to protect their neck. That's a very that's a very mind body connection thing. So a lot of people who go through trauma in relationships will have buildup in their neck to protect what is vulnerable to them.
Wow. I love reading and hearing about this information because as you talk about it, you can't help but think about your own experiences and the times in your life where, or me for myself, when I've gone through certain things and when I bring it back up and I recount the story, like you said, our body goes back through it again because a part of us is stuck there, is frozen there, is locked there. And that also reminds me as to why it's said in some of these texts that you with the childhood trauma or the younger trauma that has happened, it isn't really efficient to go and try to heal it with who you are today. Like you literally have to go back to who you were and heal it at that time, right? Because the child has a different worldview, a different understanding of reality. So if that specific part of the mind is locked in its place as a 7-year old, 8-year old, 6-year old, you have to find a way to communicate in that language
Yes.
because that part of you is literally still in that moment.
Yes. And that's the other part of the allowance, right? And that 6 year old, if my conscious mind, if my conscious being myself was asked, or what do you need in that moment? I would tell myself, I probably need a hug. I probably need to understand that, life is hard. Whatever. Gonna come up through
Hmm.
stuff. You can get it, kid, that kind of thing, right? But
Hmm.
what 6 year old Alora needed was a fucking fairy to show up and to be like, hey, we can be friends. I just popped up out of a flower and I love you. You were right. You're right to hang out in this field because there are fairies all over the place. That's what 6 year old Alora needed. That's that's
Oh,
that's what she needed. That's not, she didn't need a hug from another human. She needed a fairy. And we gave it to her. And when we gave it to her and she became the fairy, right? When she inhaled all those colors and when that all of that transformation happened, the identity, the identification with that moment changed. So, and fun fact too, you can actually find what your dominant colors are for safety, protection, that kind of thing, for what you surround yourself with on a regular. They can be multitudes of colors, but you'll probably find that you're wearing them pretty often. So what's interesting, I'll use myself as an example again. Um, when I when I closed my eyes, right in the beginning, we had us close our eyes and then we envisioned a place that we considered magic and safe and calm and something that's extremely comfortable. It could be a place that you make up, a place that you've seen before or that you've experienced before. And when you're in this place, imagine the colors, imagine the textures. What does it look like? What does it smell like? What can you feel in this place? Once you got it, create a frame around it. What color is this frame? What texture does the frame have? Tell yourself that. Explain to yourself, describe to yourself what color is the frame and what texture it is. What does it look like? Once you have that, bring in all of those colors and textures into yourself. Feel it running through like a river from your head down to your toes, all the way through. What feelings do you have? Observe it and feel it. Understand it. This is how you can access this comfortable and safe place that you can always go back to. So you may find that these colors are in your everyday life already. For myself, my frame was black and gold. What do I wear on a daily basis? Black and gold. The color of the fairy that I inhaled that helped me heal that moment is the same color of my hair that I dyed when I needed to feel freedom. I chose blue green, and that was the color of the fairy. So we're expressing these colors, these colors of safety, these colors of protection, these colors of healing all the time in our daily lives, but we're unconscious of it. We just know that we like it, but we don't know why. We'll try creating a frame around a scene where you that puts you in a state of comfort and of safety, or maybe a scene that makes you feel powerful. Whatever state you want to access, put a frame around it. See what color that frame is, and you'll probably see those colors pop up in your everyday life too. Another fun thing I noticed as well is that after doing this type of therapy, right, I've noticed that my attraction skills are like off the wall. Like once your emotions neutralize even just a part of your everyday pattern, you start to notice the world in a completely different way, and things that you just think about randomly will start appearing. Which brings us back to that overall idea or discussion of emotions are constantly predicting what's going to happen. When you clear old patterns and you recalibrate them to a state of balance and peace, your emotions and your thoughts literally align then to the present moment, to what's going to happen. This is where we start getting really in touch with psychic awareness, law of attraction, all of the magic stuff. But you have to be in balance. You have to be, this is what alignment is.
Massive. First thing I'm going to do when I get off of here is I'm going to go to Mid Journey and I'm going to create a picture of what I just visualized. I'm going to print it
Yeah.
out, frame.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, my scene, it's like burned in my mind. It's like I can, like, and I can access that frame anytime. So another really important thing when reprogramming too, in particular with holographic memory resolution, right? So during that scene with the fairy, the overall feeling that I got, or the overall saying that my subconscious mind came up with was, I'm right as I am. That is the new belief that I am going to continue programming. So you can't just have it in the moment and then just be like, okay, I'm done with it. You
Right.
continue, right? No, like it doesn't work like that. You have to think about it. This took years and years and years of compounding on itself, of building up itself to get a really strong pattern that continues to repeat itself in your everyday life 20, 30 years later. So you can't think that one session is going to all of a sudden change all of that. No, it takes time. You're going to reveal it. You can clear a lot of it, but you're going to need to continue to retrain your system to this new response that it's given itself to heal. You've literally told yourself how to heal yourself. And so visualize the color going through you. Visualize that safe space, the frame going through you in times where you start feeling your breath changing, or you're feeling yourself getting a little bit iffy. And but really all throughout your day do it, and then reinstate that belief, that new belief system that you came up with. over and over and over again. Now, the number I was given was 52 times. I do it 108 because I have my my Vedic system, and so I chant 108 times my new belief system or my new belief phrase in that exactly. Yep, yep. And then as I do that, I visualize and I soak in all of the colors, either the blue, green, and then I start with the black and gold. And it's so cool when you go through something like this as well and you're doing magic, because let's talk about Ophil's opening visualization, right? Like where you envision the blue flame pentagram and the dawn and like the colors of the dawn, right? Like you're evoking a state. What you're doing is you're connecting to your subconscious quite literally, and this, you're attaching a meaning to it that the emotion that you feel is going to be an expression of, and that's going to put you in alignment with whatever work it is that you're about to do. So, color within itself is a formula that our higher minds speak very clearly, that our conscious minds, we have to learn how to relax. But when we learn how that system actually works, that's when we can start getting the result. We're not just getting yellow because it's yellow. We're understanding that this is a formula. And when I understand my relationship to that formula, my real relationship to that formula, then I can start utilizing it for what is most useful and appropriate.
That's nice. I'm still hung up on my picture.
So cool.
So yeah, that's I can see that being overlooked, especially by me, how important our relationship to these colors are. Like, it's no accident, it's no coincidence. We choose what we choose. And it's, you could say that, oh, I'm choosing these things so that I can change my inner world, but it's the other way around. These are chosen because of what's on the inside.
Yeah. Yeah. You're learning how to speak to yourself.
Yeah.
You're learning what you actually want, who you actually are.
An interesting synchronicity. Very recently, as me and my cousin are working with Lakshmi and doing different things,
Mm,
one of the messages communicated to him was that those big Vedic pictures, like they all look like they're made by the same artist. It's got like the deity, the goddess sitting there Indian style, and the stuff in the background.
All the
Those
beautiful
types.
ornate textures and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have, we've got a couple of those, and right now we've got the Lakshmi hanging up in the dining room, and sometimes we kind of just, do Tritaka on it. And he was like, we're supposed to go there and meditate. Like, we're supposed to go into that image, like that frame around the image. It's almost like a window. You're supposed to step into it and sit next to her and meditate. I was like, okay, that's different. I started trying it, and um, the first time I did it, it corrected my Tat Washuddhi meditation.
Mm.
And I say corrected because I didn't realize that I modified it. Um, or at least there were some things that I modified that I believe is okay because it keeps with the principle. But there was another part that I modified that I didn't realize. And I spoke about this last time, but basically, after doing that meditation with Lakshmi, I went into Tat Washuddhi. And after going into the golden egg, um, when the egg hatched, instead of coming out how I usually do, I was just a pure point of light. And just existing in that moment, I realized this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't know when I changed it, but that it stuck with me the rest of the day. Like, I was seeing myself as a point of light, not as a person walking through the world.
Yeah, so Trip, I actually had something very similar like that happen to me too as during a Tattva Shuddhi meditation. Um, so in my one of my more recent ones, I when you get to the end where you're supposed to visualize, right, Prana Shakti. And I kind of realized that, like, man, I cannot get past this fuzzy image of her. Like, I don't understand. I see these colors, I see the symbols, but I can't get the whole picture. And all of a sudden in my vision, I started inhaling her. Like like I had to let her come in and be me. And then I was no longer me. And when you describe your experience with the egg, that was kind of my first one of my first I guess openings into understanding, like, you're becoming the ego, right? But before then you're nothing, like that kind of thing, because it was also like, what does it mean to become the egg? What does it mean to actually not have a form at all inside of that, to be the air inside the egg and the shell,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, this is the deeper understanding. This is the part of ourselves that we actually are, that we're getting to know. It doesn't have a name. There is no there is no actual skin there. We are vibrational beings that work off of frequency. And these are the frequencies that are of our true selves.
Yes. And that is the truth. And depending on the clarity of how you express yourself, that can just sound like fluffy buzzwords that feel good, or you can actually understand what that means. And I think that lately, with studying this cosmic doctrine by Dion Fortune, it's really giving me a platform within my own mind to understand the unmanifest. Because after reading this book, I see a line has been drawn of how I used to visualize the unmanifest and how I'm able to work with it now.
Mhm.
And that's important because, like you said, we are vibrational beings. We are not hard meat bags walking around. It's just that, you have, we have a movie, a film strip, and you allow that film strip to roll with the light flashing through it. All those individual scenes appear to be what you see, but you could change the speed of that, right? You could slow it down, you could speed it up, and depending on with the speed, it may appear differently. We're vibrational beings, and at the speed that we're perceiving reality now, we're seeing the vibrations manifest as shapes and colors and sounds. They're fractioned, just like a white light going through a prism. Why is all this important? Because that white light going through the prism, we can say that's our true self. So if we want to have this experience as harmonized as possible, we have to go back to that white light point as best we can, right? The unmanifest. And one of the best ways to do that is to backtrack and see all the different filters and fractions that are happening before that point.
Yeah, because we are also the frame. We're the ones that are framing these scenes. There's a collection of impressions, or so there's like a specific frequency and then there's a set of frequencies, right? And we're the ones that not only create that instance to happen, but we also put the frame around it. And that frame gives it a meaning, gives it a form. That's why you have things like psionics, right? Which is literally using music to create form. These people, they'll play an instrument next to a stream, and that running stream of water going in one direction, all of a sudden that water will start creating a swirl. So you're using just one channel, sound, to literally create a frame, a form from this collection of frequencies and vibrations. This is the story of our lives. This is what we're doing. You are the egg and the space inside. Like, this is the frame. So when you understand what you've put frames around and the meanings you have assigned these collection of frequencies, you can then start to reorganize them. and create a different picture completely. But you have to, but yeah, so like what, yeah, I'm totally vibing off of what you're saying. Oh,
No, I'm
goodness.
vibing off of what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we're doing. This is energy work. So when we're talking about ritual and magic and metaphysical, right? We're talking what is beyond the physical. We are aware that this stuff is here. I'm holding this glass, but we are also aware that this isn't actually here. This is something that I have accepted into my reality, that I put a frame around it. This is a collection of frequencies, a set of
Yeah.
frequencies that I have put a frame around. And I've said, yeah, this is a cup. And what's interesting is that there is a societal pressure that's telling me that if I label it anything else, wrong.
Mm.
So think about that impression now. That set of frequencies being added on to this picture, right? Like this is how we can start seeing the same things. This is what people call the middle ground. So there's always one thing that I'm really tapping into recently is that space in between the unmanifest and the manifest, right? Like when we talk in Samkhya, right? How there was the great the all was nothing, right? It was just the all. And then all of a sudden there was there wasn't the thought that happened first, but there was actually the plane or the space that was created for the thought to then come about, right? For the first instance where the all created something. But before that moment, there was an environment that was created, there was a frame that was created for it. This is what we see repeated over and over and over again in nature. This is how we work. This is why one of our sacred geometry signals is a triangle, right? You have the source, and then you have the branch off that is still the source, but is like the playing field for what is to come next, for the thing.
Divine masculine, divine feminine. Yeah. I think of when you describe that playing field and what's to come, that's like the two of wands card where he's standing there holding the wand looking out onto the field, observing Bina, Prakriti. Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting to think that of that triangle, like those are two different states. That top level is the state where there's no need to create a space because everything is literally intermingled and mixed and it just is what it is. But just like I mentioned with the movie reel, if you slow that down, if you slow down the frequency of that reel just a little bit, instead of seeing all of everything as one, if you slow down the frame rate, you'll now see it as two. You'll now see it as a performer and a stage. And I imagine that if we slow it down even more, we'll start to see more to the point that now it's difficult to differentiate the player from the stage because there's so many things to see and hear, allegedly.
Yeah. I mean, that's what working the astral is, right? The deeper you get into the astral, the harder it is to determine what's separate, because you're
Yeah.
like, man, I'm now seeing, this picture was once clear, but now all of a sudden I'm seeing the actual waves of particles and how they're intermingling and how
Hmm.
the scene continues to change, because now I'm in this space where all of the information gathers. Everything is gathering itself, and I'm now truly the observer. So I'm watching this start to create, manifest, and work off of what? My emotions, my deep eternal state. Where was I that day? How was I feeling that day? This
Hmm.
dream is going to reflect that on that level. You best believe it, because guess what? That's the information it's receiving. That's how
Yes.
you're able to express that information. I'm so glad I get to talk to you tonight about this stuff, because holy cow, I tried, this is where filtering comes in. All right, because like you can share it within certain groups of people, but then there's other people that just do not are they don't. It's like when I'm working with a trial in class, right? And I'm trying to show them to me a simple punch drill, right? Like, okay, you punch here and you punch here, and you do it like this, right? And
Hmm.
I want to tell them, like, oh man, like if you turn your hip and move from the ground, you're going to get this effect, and you want it to be in line with your shoulder, and because if this person does this, you can all of a sudden read how they're going to move if you watch their shoulder. Like, I want to tell them so much information. It's like they've never punched in their life. They don't
Yeah. Yeah. Meet them where they're at, they say, right?
talking about, they don't want to take the class anymore. Like, like it's
It's too
overwhelming.
much.
Yeah, it's too much. It's too much. So like it's so nice to be in that environment where it's like, oh yeah, no, it's not too much. Like
I understand, right? I see what you're saying.
yeah, for sure.
I saw that filtering in action and I had a realization. My cousin was showing me a mantra, really great mantra. Like, damn. Usually stuff doesn't happen to me in the moment, but as I was listening to it, like my heart chakra just I felt it. That doesn't usually happen with me. I know other people that happens with, but usually I feel those things later. But in the moment, anyways, this was a meditation that eliminates karma instantly. And there was a Swami that was describing it and the backstory and everything. And since I know a little bit about Vedic stuff, I could hear in his voice how he was, instead of saying Chitta and Buddhi and Ahamkara, instead of saying that, he was trying his best to just explain it in plain English. No fancy words, no trying to deep metaphysical concepts. He was just breaking it down in plain English. And that made me think, like, maybe I should go back and maybe listen again to, hell, like say Sadhguru or someone that's somewhat mainstream, and try to pick up where they just might be actually saying some deep stuff, but they're using language to communicate with what you call the common ground.
Hmm.
That's a
Yeah,
skill.
it is. It is. It's kind of like you can do something fast, but you're a master at it when you can do it slow. Right, because you understand every part of it. We can go heavy and deep into it, but if we can't organize our thoughts to even being able to describe this concept on layman terms, how much do we really know of the subject? Because we started off there.
Yeah.
So how is it that we can be at the level that we're at and not understand where we were and what needed to be communicated with us? Here's the other thing that I'm finding really interesting too about like learning patterns and how we're picking up stuff. So in energy work, there's two ways that they're able to measure it, right? So hold on, let me look at my notes. One of them is quantity scale and the other is quality scale. So for quality scale, it's measuring the amount of impact in a given moment that this energy burst has given, right? So like if I like scream and throw something, that's gonna be a quality type expression of energy because it's just a fucking lot all at once and it makes an effect right there. Quantity is when it's over time. So a running stream comes to my mind, right? Like we know that when a stream is running, it's going to have this effect because it does it enough times. So we're like, yeah, this is how the water is going to flow. So this is how they're able to measure energy and its effects and be able to work with energy. It's the same thing with our learning strategies. So if you're teaching someone something or you're learning something, Some people need to spend time just learning the whole subject, and then they practice it a few times, but they're able to apply all of the things that they were able to learn and create a massive amount of impact. Have quality, like, okay, I've been shown this, I get it. Then there's those of us who need quantity. So I need to do this over and over and over and over again, and then I'll fully be able to process it the more I do it, right? So it's like, so there's actually also our two ways of learning, which our two ways of learning what? Learning is your brain creating new neural pathways, new visions of what it is going to carry out, of how it is going to carry out this new task. It's going to create a new future for you in this thing that you are learning. So in all this time, we're working with energy, we're doing energy work, and we have the same scale that we use when learning that they use when actually just working with the energy itself and understanding its manifestations in this world.
It would make sense, right? Because we are experiencing reality as energy. So it would make sense that we behave as such. Yeah, that's what everything is. Yeah,
Hmm.
it makes total sense, and it's so important to understand how you operate specifically, because then you'll know what to get into and what to not get into, strengths and
Right,
weaknesses.
right. Again, you're understanding yourself. You're understanding how you put yourself into alignment and how you put yourself out of it. I know so many people who are like, oh, I'm a slow learner. No, you just need quantity. You've probably been around people who absorb
Mm,
information as quality, where they just take all of the info and then apply it in this way, and you don't work like that. There's nothing wrong with that. You're not slow. That's the meaning you have assigned to it is what's holding you frozen in that moment.
yes, because more than likely somebody told you that you're a slow learner and you accepted that, and they've added that as a frame over learning.
Right, right. And so this is
Yikes.
what we work with. This is what we're working with. This is how we're learning to read our own energy signatures. And we can do that through magic, through chaos magic, through through Vedic principles, because it's all there. We just have to know how to read the information. Like when so another mind body connection, right? Like, so I was having lower back issues pretty badly, right? Like, it was actually, as soon as I started weightlifting, I man, I started getting lower back issues, and like issues in my groin, and I was like, what the heck, man? I'm doing like I do yoga a lot, okay? Like I'm a very like I don't understand where this is coming from. So I went to a physical therapist, right? And he starts doing trigger point. The trigger point is literally it's the type of massage therapy that I do, where it's you find a knot, and that knot is will have a referral. So you might feel that going, if I push on a knee, I might feel that going all the way up to my hip or down my leg, right? It's going in another place. And what that is just actually a connection to a nerve channel that got messed up or that got scrunched together. And you're releasing it by applying pressure at both points. So he, what?
Oh, as you described that, I remember I have one where every now and then, if I'll touch my neck, I'll feel it all the way up in my jaw.
Yes, yes, yes. So that's a trigger point, right? These are nerve channels that got bundled up in muscle fibers through repetitive use of doing stuff, right? Repeated stuff that we're doing. So when we looked at where all of these were connected, what we found was that from 2012, from my injury, from an old injury I had one leg that I had the leg that got hurt, I super rehabbed it, but I also babied it. And there were certain movements that I wasn't doing that I was compensating on the other side. So my other side, my right side of my hip was locked up in mobility. And as a result, my left side was very weak in some other places. So I could be really flexible, but I didn't have the strength because the way how I trained my body to move after the injury was babying it, made certain muscles not develop where they needed. So I was imbalanced. So that's why I was feeling all this lower back pain. So I had to change my routine. And when I started doing mobility work, they were so simple, like they were the simplest movements on the planet, right? Like bringing my knee up as much as I could while standing and then bringing it out to the side and turning it and bringing it back, right? So simple. And it was really hard to do because I realized that I was unaware that I had been using all other parts of my body to move my leg in that direction. But when I tried to actually isolate and use the the hip like I was supposed to on that side to properly use it, it was super, super weak. So I've had to build up that strength over time. Now, I say that because that's kind of like the same thing that we're talking about when it comes to emotional strain or a practice or anything like that. We may think, well, shit, I'm really good at attracting things that I want to attract, or I'm really good at, you know, getting this stuff met. But there may always be like this resistance that we're feeling or this kind of background noise that we're unaware of what's happening. Well, it's because you might have been focusing too much on your flexibility and not enough on your mobility.
Mm.
You might have not been asking another set of questions that you should be asking yourself in order to clear that out. So you just normalize it. And then when you start a new practice, all of a sudden, why the hell am I not having the effects like I used to have? Why am I not strong in this? I thought I was doing everything right.
Wow. So the implications of that, what you just said, is that it takes a concert in order for a single thing to go down. Whether it's something as simple as lifting up your knee, right? It isn't just your thigh coming up. There's a whole concert of muscles involved, and they have a history, a story, a relationship, right? So nothing exists in isolation. In other words, if there's perceived failure or even perceived success, it helps to understand the concert, the symphony, right? It was a team effort. It would be erroneous, number one, to call it a failure because that's not what it is. And number
Right.
two, to blame it on one thing when it perhaps had many moving parts or not moving parts.
Mhm. Right.
Hmm.
This is why just like saying affirmations, it can give you a it can give you a short-term benefit. But if you're not in connection to what your actual belief system is, you may not even be doing the right affirmations. You may be thinking like, oh, my self-love affirmation, like for me, right? Like my self-love I was doing self-love affirmations like nonstop, right? All the time stuff. Yeah, they made me feel good. But it wasn't until I did this session where I realized, wow, I need to actually what I really needed was to redefine my idea of empowerment. What does empowerment mean? And then all this stuff unveiled, all these muscles that I hadn't been using suddenly came up. And I was like, wow, okay. So I need to actually analyze my relationship with empowerment. What does that mean? Whoa, where do I feel that in my body? Man, what 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 texture is it? How old was I when I first thought that? What has been my idea of it up until this point?
Yeah. Damn, that deepens the mind body relationship. That whole metaphor. Because before, I've heard that word and I've heard about the book. I haven't read it, but now when you describe it like that, there's even desires that we have, or hopes and dreams and wishes and beliefs that are connected, that are literally connected to body movements and postures, and it all works together in a relationship. It's all,
Hmm.
and the quality of how
Oh,
you use it.
yeah. And like, even if you, so like one of those instances, right? Um, when I was in hypnosis, and so I had a vision where I was 12 years old and I was on my way to a neighbor's house, and I was coming up with stories in my mind, um, because I was frustrated that my neighbor just wanted to watch TV all day. And I wanted to go outside, but she was my only neighbor, so I didn't have anyone to hang out with. So
Hmm.
I came up with the belief that I have to do things that I don't want to do in order to have friends.
Hmm.
That was one of the compounding beliefs, right, that I had developed at that time. So the question was then, okay, what do you need at this time? I want a friend to be weird with. So I created a friend to be weird with. We went to the creek and all this kind of stuff, right? And where was I going with that? Shoot, I like had it and then I lost it. We were talking about the mind body connection. Okay, so at that time, right, the first initial feeling in my body that brought us to that moment in time was that I had felt going from my throat to my stomach like a metal rod. And it was like stuck in there. And there was this big old like metal ball that it was attached to. And so when we went in, we had this experience, right? I had the friend, we went to the creek, and I was asked then, okay, how does this metal rod going from your throat to your stomach connecting to that metal ball? How does that feel now? And we had discussed previously what it felt like to have it in there before we had resolved it, right? Before we had resolved it, I said, well, I feel like I can't really breathe. Like I kind of have to slouch over. Like I feel like I have something hard in my stomach and like I can't stand up straight. When I was in that vision with my friend and we determined how we felt with the metal rod, I said, well, it feels like it's gone. I feel like I can breathe and I can move around. Well, that was an indication. That was my subconscious telling my body that when I start feeling that upset stomach and that type of raw feeling in my system, in my body, when I get constrained with breathing, I need to breathe, take deep breaths, and move. That is an internal coping system that puts me back into alignment when I am stressed. So it was a healing method that I told myself that works for me. So when you go into your own process and you start figuring out, okay, this doesn't, I get this stomach ache or I get this feeling or whatever in my throat, you start releasing it. Ask yourself, what does it feel like as it's releasing? And you're going to be able to tell yourself, you're going to be able to find out what you need to do when you start feeling that constriction again. Maybe you need to move. Maybe you need to start clapping. Maybe you need to roll your head around. Maybe there's something that you need to do, a movement that you need to do, or a way of breathing that you need to have in order to put yourself back in alignment, in order to realign with that freedom feeling.
Man, so many things going through my head with this. I'm thinking of all the different gestures and movements that I do just like throughout the day that are connected with certain thoughts, like the anchors, really. Like, I know for me, when it comes to if there is some type of negative self-talk or a negative response to the environment or another person or whatever, I'm pretty good with nipping it at the bud and shutting it down before it goes off into a train of thought. And I'm seeing now that there are physical gestures involved with that process, right? If I hear something going on, like I'll, whether it's a clench of my fist or my toes, or I'll do something to like stop. Like, I'm just thinking back, I've been doing these for years, and like I was aware of them, but I'm becoming aware. And not only this, like as you're describing your story, it is making me wonder if I have one of those areas nearby, or if I could learn this, because I could see that there are people that I care about that could benefit from this. They might not be interested in NLP as I've described it or magic, but I think they could go for something like this.
Yeah. And even just getting them to, so touch is one of the direct channels that gives our brain information. So sight and touch is really important. If you ever seen a homunculus drawing, it's of a little human and they have these big ass eyes and hands. That's an illustration of a direct extension from our brain. So if our brain is like communicating with us, it's through our eyes and it's through touch. So getting people even just comfortable with touch again is extremely healing. And you will find a whole bunch of releases, which is what we already do regularly, but you'll find more, which are somatic responses. So when I experience this a lot in my profession. I'll be holding a spot, especially with people who've had surgeries or any kind of big stuff that they've been moving through, and I'll hold one of their knots, and all of a sudden their arm will start to shake and twitch, and they'll be like, and they'll try to stop it. They'll clench their fist and they'll be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm trying to stop it." And the thing about the nerve channels is that when you clench your fist, you're actually blocking circulation. So you want to open your hand so then all of your system can start circulating a lot more. Right. So, and this is why too, like mudras are super important to understand, right? And this kind of stuff, because the touch is a way of how we communicate to a parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, which programs and tells our emotions when to express themselves. Like this is direct communication to the brain. So, like, you may have somatic responses that you may not even realize are holding tons of memory or just like a whole bunch of healing methods and releasing methods that your body wants to utilize for you. It wants to release this stuff. It just needs you to tell it it's okay. Go ahead and release. We have to stop blocking ourselves from being able to have this. That's why somatic therapy is a real thing. Because when you get someone in touch and allow them to just shake, all of a sudden they'll start doing it all the time. Like touch them and they'll be like, "Wee!" Like, okay, sorry, releasing, letting it go.
Wow. During our meditation session today, um, Lakshmi communicated to me, just allow it to happen. Just allow it to happen. In reference to the healing and in reference to the purging, that was what was echoing all day today. Just allow it to happen. And now you're saying it.
Just allow it to happen, man. Yeah. And I really think the allowance is, as magicians, our biggest, biggest lesson. Like allowing ourselves to learn, allowing
Because
ourselves to
we
expand.
want to be in control, right? We want to control the subconscious and control reality and all this other stuff.
Yeah. And it's because our conscious mind is doing what it's supposed to do. The way how we form our reality is by trying to validate it or make it or to change it. So we don't validate it, right? Like if I don't like apples and I am cemented in that, I do not like apples. Every time I bite into an apple, even if I envision biting into an apple, my rational conscious mind is going to say, you fucking hate this. You hate that apple. It's going to taste terrible. In fact, even as you're pretending to eat the apple, you're not going to taste it because you hate the apple. Your whole body is going to repulse it. It's going to try and change it instead of just taking as what an apple tastes like, taking the identification out of it, right? Like so it's doing its job because that's how we have our experience, right? But we can't let that control, especially if we're trying to expand in consciousness. Man, we're trying to break out into that level um where there isn't a limit, there isn't a boundary. And that's something that takes time with the allowance factor. And that's where the discernment comes in too, right? Because we can't lose ourselves over there. If we want to continue living a happy, healthy life over here, at some point we're going to have to draw that line, draw that frame, and
Yeah,
have that frame. Like our we're trying to protect ourselves. But yeah, it's such a it that's I constantly feel like that is the balance that we come up against whenever we are whenever we are exploring or working or learning with expansion of consciousness, with magic, with all of that. It's the allowance factor. What am I allowing to occur?
that's a major strength, right? That's a major strength. We think that the biggest strength is being able to snap our fingers and control and manifest, but in truth, what I've learned over these years is the most important thing is to study these cycles and study these patterns and study what already exists, study what existed before this incarnation came here, and what will continue after this incarnation leaves. Understanding the processes and the flows, that way I can make sure that I'm in alignment. I'm where I need to be, right? Because if I found myself in a place where it's like, oh, I got to manifest a solution, I was out of order, right?
Hmm.
I was out of alignment with something for me to end up there. Whatever problems that we have in our lives is because we weren't in a place where that would not have happened, right?
Hmm.
It makes sense. So really, a lot of magic is understanding how this reality works and acting accordingly.
Hmm. Yeah, and
That
where I go ahead.
it's so much better to. My uncle used to say it's better to keep up than to catch up, right? It's so much better to stay out of trouble than trying to get out of trouble.
Yeah, and if we can help that, and what's interesting about it too is it's not within control of external circumstances that we actually gain control over our lives. It's being open to connection to ourselves. So I think the big Maya here, right? The illusion of it all is that everything is external of us. So all of the meanings that we assign things, everything that we're living for, we're believing that we're reacting to this external reality, that it's influencing us and that we have to influence it. And the practice is realizing that if we can just influence ourselves, if we can discover ourselves, then everything else neutralizes. Everything else works out for us. Everything else becomes harmonious. Like it's not in control that you have dominion. It's in releasing the control that you gain dominion. Because then you see what you actually are working with.
Mm, because what is trying to gain control? What is the part of our consciousness that is attempting to control? It's a part of our consciousness that doesn't even have control of itself,
Right?
which is
It's a
probably why
tool.
yes, right,
It's a tool. It's not even us, it's a tool that we're using. So it's simply doing its job and you're letting it control your whole life. We all do it. We all do it.
right. And the misuse of that tool is at the root of all of our discomfort.
Hmm. Yeah. So our rational brain really gets in the way sometimes. We have to rationalize things, rationalize. And it's like, well, the subconscious mind is not rational and it's not linear either. It's not like because this happened, now this happened. No, like karma's a thing, but it doesn't function in a linear fashion. We automatically assume that karma, because karma is cause and effect, that means that if this cause happened, then this effect happens immediately afterwards. And in the grand scheme of things, that's not actually how it works. There's
Right.
this cause, and then there's this ripple effect.
There we go. Right. Like you said, we think of it linear, but no, it's cyclical, right? It
Hmm.
expands outward. And it doesn't just our actions and our thoughts don't just affect us. They affect all of the aspects that are in relationship with our central point, which includes the environment, other people. Um, it's not even based on distance. It's what you're entangled with.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool
What
beans.
you're entangled with. It's the story that you've created,
The frame around your picture.
right? Yep. These little movie scenes.
Man, I gotta print that image out. I had a badass frame too. I'm not so sure if that's a real material, but I'm gonna print that picture out that I visualized. That was very
Yeah,
pleasant. Very
that's
nice.
awesome. Oh yeah. I know, isn't that cool? And then you can call that upon, and you should call it frequently too. Like that's the other thing, right? It's like most of us go to our practices because not guilty of this, because we're going through a hard time. Things will be like working well, so you're like, like I don't need to keep doing all this. So I'm just gonna, hang out for a bit and enjoy the moment and stuff like that. And that's all good and fine. But when you're continuously applying what you've learned, like, I continue to imagine the color in the frame and having it soak through my body and the color of the fairy and the new belief system. All I'm doing is just cementing that more and more as a pattern that I'm going to repeat. So when something negative occurs, it's not going to happen in the same way that it had in the past. So I won't find myself ever again being like, oh shit, here we are again. Like, it's going to have a different result. I'm literally creating a different system for myself. So, like, this is one of those crucial things too, where it's like you got to keep practicing it, keep cementing in these new ways of thinking, this new, keep in, keep imprinting yourself with these colors and impressions. You can't just stop for a week or just because you feel good. Do it when you feel good, because then your body's automatically going to go to that when it starts to feel a little bit stressed. It's not going to wait for the moment. It's going to automatically have that in the system. And you're not even going to feel the stress in the same way.
Yeah, so it's almost like meditation and consistent ritual opens up a new tool set, or in reference to what Dion Fortune said in the Cosmic Doctrine, we gain new responses to our environment. Specifically, when we meditate frequently, eventually you're going to reach a space or a state that is different from your baseline state. And the goodness of that is that throughout life, as you're dealing with your stressful experiences, you can always tap into that state. Like it's as if you've unlocked it now. Likewise, there are specific meditations that you can do that can unlock specific states that can be utilized for specific things. And I think it's really interesting, as I said before, that my cousin had recommended that I meditate within the image of the goddess or the deity or whatever focus, go next to them and meditate. That opened up something for me now. You describing this, the picture, this zone, this dimension, right, of color. That's a place, that's a tool, that's something that can be used now. And like you said, through repetition, it'll become second nature to jump into it, just like it'll become second nature to recite a mantra or to do a mudra. Like, say, if you get pulled over for speeding or whatever, instead of shit, fuck, god damn, I can't believe, fuck it. Instead of going through all that and those mantras, maybe you can go through a Ganesh mantra, right? Maybe you can tap into a mudra and walk away with a warning.
Right. Because, yeah, go ahead.
because these things place you into certain states, which now open up new behaviors that are available to you.
That is the practice. That's like when people say I'm communicating with my guides, or I'm having all this, I'm connecting to this god or to this goddess or anything like that. What you're connecting to, and we've said this thousands of times, right, is an aspect of yourself, is an aspect of the higher self. So it's new information that you're tapping into, a new way of connecting to yourself that's opening up a new toolbox. So keep expanding in that, because this is why too being having awareness of your states is so important, because it's like if I'm in a certain state, then everything that occurs to me, whether it's new or not, is going to resonate with the state that I'm in. So if I have unresolved anger, my relationship to Lakshmi is going to be resonant with that unresolved anger, whatever that is. My relationship with money it might be of lower magic that I can attract something, but on the higher scale, that certain stuff I'm not going to be able to access, because I haven't freed myself from that moment where that anger became frozen, where I became frozen in that time. I haven't allowed to move forward, and therefore I can't open that door to what else there is to offer. These mantras and these gods and goddesses and all this kind of stuff that we connect to, again, they are formulas, they are channels for us to tap into. But we have to be able to tap into that. We have to understand where we truly are when we're tapping into it, because you can hold a cross and feel its power if it's been meditated on and passed down or has some serious significance. You can feel it on
Mhm.
surface level, but you're not going to be able to get deeper into that until you resolve whatever it is that you got to resolve within yourself, until you can actually move forward into that and be within a state to receive that information. And knowing what state you are in to receive that information will also bring you into the awareness of what information you are receiving. Like, if I'm connecting to a goddess and I'm getting money luck and stuff, my love life is shit,
Oh, yeah.
right? Or whatever. That's because there's a state that I'm currently holding there. It's not Lakshmi's fault. It's
Right.
not, there's me trying to project externally. No, I have to explore within. That's where I
We,
find that healing stuff gets really good too, like healing mantras, or like learning how to ask again different questions. How can I heal this? Help me heal this. What do I need to become aware of? And then you start attracting people or situations in your life that inspire you to ask more appropriate questions that get you into where you want to be.
we can only see out here as deeply as we can see in here. Just like with what you said about that cross, it sure there can be a surface level observation of power, but you're not going to tap into the depths of that power unless you tap into the depths of yourself. And it makes sense because what our soul is created out of, what our consciousness is consisting of, is all the potential forces that exist, all the potential patterns, all the potential vibrations, frequencies, whatever exists, whatever is manifested at all, there's a part of it within us, even if it's extremely distant. So whatever we've gone into ourselves and connected with, we're able to recognize it in the external world. So if I do a lot of work within myself on Mars energy, right, and I really tapped into that Mars energy, I'll be able to easily perceive it. And if I've never connected with Jupiter energy, right, my money magic might not be as efficient as someone else who has. And when
Hmm.
we tap into these gods and goddesses, they are like the pure they are a pure frequency of some sort. And what that means is that when our inner light, when our soul connects with that light, it awakens within us the part of us that is, resonant with them. It's like when you put two violins on a table next to each other, same exact type. If you strum one and hit that C note, the other one is going to vibrate as if it's being played, right? It's working in that same way. But if we've never really connected with those parts of ourselves, it's going to be kind of difficult to hope to easily tap into anything like that. That's why doing the work is so important. That's what the work is, knowing
Yeah,
thyself.
right. Learning to recognize it. Because I think that's the other thing too, right? It kind of goes back to like, man, I'm not getting this. I'm not, and it's a part of myself that I'm not recognizing, that I'm unaware is playing out. And because I'm unaware of,
Uh oh. I think there's a freeze.
can you hear me?
Yes. Last thing I heard was because I'm unaware.
Oh, because I'm on, yeah, because essentially just because I'm unaware of what's happening, of what's being blocked within me. And that's where going to your body and going to immediately in front of you is your perfect next step because you're always where you're supposed to be. So this is why, back to the holographic memory and why that's so effective.
Uh oh.
Okay.
So you said that's why back to the holographic memory is so effective because,
Yeah, because it takes you right back to the body, right to where you immediately need to be. So, where are you feeling it in your body? What size is it? What shape is it? What texture is there? Is it heavy? Is it light? What's the temperature? How old? I don't know what's going on, man. But
look, it's Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg and Diddy. They're watching the live stream and they're blocking the signal.
it's too heavy. It's too heavy. But
Right.
but yeah, I mean, you got to start from where you are. Start from where you are. Where do you feel it in your body? When you can do that, and then ask yourself, how old was I when I first felt this feeling? Allow whatever comes up, come up, and give yourself time to answer that too. There were certain points where I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Well, wait, you'll find out. You just gotta stay in that moment. Give yourself some patience. Let come up whatever come up. Don't edit it. Just let it be. And then you'll find where that attachment is. Then you'll be able to, from there, okay, what do I need in this situation? Allow the answer be whatever the answer needs to be. Maybe you need a fairy friend. Maybe you need maybe you need a real friend. Whatever. Create it. Change your relationship to that memory. Give yourself that need, whatever that part of you needed in that moment. And then recreate the scene. Put a frame around it. Inhale the frame and practice that over and over and over again. And that's clearing. And that's something you can do right now, like literally with all kinds of stuff, like all kinds of stuff. Brent Baum, the creator of holographic memory resolution, he had a little cyst on his ear. And he was like, oh, I'm gonna do a holographic memory resolution on this. So, so he's sitting there, he's playing with it, and he's like, "Where do I feel it in my body? Right here. Okay. What does it feel like? I feel like a brownish black ball. Okay, all right." And I go through the weight, the height, the size. Okay. How old was I when I felt that? Oh, I was 10. It was when I was an altar boy. It turned out there was a boy that would sit behind him, and when the priest wasn't looking, the boy would grab his ear right in that point and would always mess with him, and he hated it. And that happened for years. That boy, the little boy, would sit behind him and hit his ear. And Brent Baum didn't think anything of it except that that was an annoying kid. But eventually, from not dealing with it, it turned into a cyst. So he went back to that moment, healed the moment, gave himself what he needed to heal the moment. So, in that moment he was like, well, okay, I knew that, that kid's father was kind of rough and stuff. So I'm going to instead imagine that kid's father was actually a really cool guy, and that me and this kid had some really good playtimes together and we got to hang out. He then created a frame around that scene and inhaled the frame. And his cyst, over time, with practicing it, started to decrease in size until it no longer was there. So he now specializes not just in working with trauma, but he also is now bringing that into the clinical setting and working with people who have cancers and all kinds of diseases. And he's not claiming that this is a cure, but he is claiming that there is a correspondence between memories that we've hold and emotions that we've hold with those memories, and how the body is keeping that in there. So when we start releasing these memories and healing those instances, the body can continue to start to heal itself. Not saying, he's not saying that, like, I can cure all of your cancer, but we can certainly work with some of those emotional correspondences that might have caused that cancer or those diseases.
The implications of that are massive, quite profound. In that, number one, a lot of physical ailments are certainly connected to emotional dis-ease, and that a lot of physical ailments that seemingly have no solution potentially could be reversed by dealing with some of those inner conflicts. The story about the cyst reminds me of a time that I did a Kundalini meditation, and it was like really thorough. Like, this was in the early days, and like I was really putting all the time I had into it. And I made a YouTube video about this. This was back in like 2018, 2017, or something like that. But like, I did, I had these like warts on my hand. I don't know where the hell they came from. They were gross. Um, and it wasn't even the intention, right? I just sat down and I did a full Kundalini meditation, full chakra cleanse, root chakra to crown chakra. I was really into it. Like, I felt it. I felt the light surge everywhere, the colors, right? I felt the whole thing. And I didn't think anything. I didn't, look at my hand. Like, I just realized at some point they were gone, like some point later that evening. And I'm like, this doesn't just happen. I started questioning, were they even there in the first place?
Yeah,
But again, it's not that these things are done to heal physical problems explicitly, but some of these physical issues are rooted in emotional issues, and if they're dealt with, so the manifestation of them will be dealt with. So I experienced that for myself firsthand, so I know that that's possible.
I do too. Like I believe that there's actually a lot more of our physical ailments that are caused by emotional stress than what we give credit for. I think a lot of our stuff comes from chronic stress or emotional stress. And I know that being a practitioner, um, not just with my own experiences, but my own experiences with clients, I can do um, everything right in a session with someone. And if they're not feeling me and they're not open to it, guess what? They're not healing anything. But if someone comes to me because they're referred to a doctor who they trust, and they're like, and that doctor says, she knows what she's doing. And I'm just like, oh, we'll find out, like, all right, I'm gonna do what I know of this situation, and I'm gonna work with you from that. And we're gonna kind of, I kind of, even just from how I explain my process with them, I can already tell they're going to release this with me. And sure as shit, right after the session, they'll be like, man, I can move in ways that I haven't done that. And it's because they were open to it right off the bat. They automatically knew, this girl is for me. This came from a trusted source. This girl, in my head now, everything she's saying, I'm validating what she's saying. And so now my body is going to be able to release the stuff that I've been holding on to for years.
That's called a pre-frame. We call that a pre-frame. So you have a
Mm,
frame, right? But that's called a pre-frame. Because, like, say for example, there's people that I couldn't just go up and start talking to about spiritual stuff. They wouldn't take me seriously at all, regardless of what I was saying and how relevant it was, because there are personal frames and there are group frames. We call that culture. It could be something as simple as a pre-frame that can mean all the success in the world, right? That's why certain politicians need to be co-signed by, like, say, or anybody, like a celebrity or a musician or some shoes. I don't know. Those things serve as pre-frames, and what happens is that's a rapport hijack, right? It allows us to trust easier because we see something we recognize. It's amazing how we'll literally reject the medicine we need if we don't like the container it comes in.
yeah. Yeah. If we don't identify with that frame, we're like, nah, I'm not.
Right. It could be the exact thing,
Oh
but
my
it's
God, this is like placebos work, right? This is the story of placebos right there. This is the story of binaural frequencies.
uh-oh.
Binaural frequencies work because they're two different frequencies, two or three more different frequencies that confuse your brain into thinking like, man, okay, I'm gonna make this work in this way. And they add the titles as a pre-frame. So you go into
Yeah.
it and you're like, all right, this is gonna make me wealthy. And your brain is
Right.
like, well, I guess so.
Right. Right. Okay. I mean, shit. Let it work.
Hey, on the
And then
physical
there's,
level, go ahead, go ahead.
this shit doesn't work. It doesn't work like that. That's not real. It's just sounds. This is stupid. They'll listen for 5 minutes. This is stupid, right? You got what you wanted.
Right. Right. This is and like like a more description of like the binaural beats thing, right? This is like so it's we call it tapotement in massage, right? So have you ever seen old massage school where like they like do this, right?
They don't
So
do
that's
that.
no, they do this. Yeah, everybody does this, you go, "Argh," or you hit it or whatever. You get a massage gun, right? And it's like so what
Oh,
that, right? Okay, so massage guns, that kind of stuff. That's called tapotement. And what that does is that rapidly hits the muscle so much that it gets confused and it lets go of the tension. So it's like so much is happening. Oh, and it relaxes itself. So like with athletes, before a race or before a competition, or even during it, you'll see massage therapists will go really fast to shake up the muscles because the muscles are holding on to tension. And the only way that they have can release it is if they're forced to, is if they're confused and overwhelmed. So binaural beats is essentially doing the same thing. It's matching these different frequencies in your brain, and your brain doesn't know how to recognize it, so it starts to relax. It goes to its base function, which is, beta, whatever. And then you have your direction to it. This binaural beat is going to make me wealthy, or I'm going to be younger. And so your brain, already overwhelmed, goes, okay, I'm going to relax into this. We're going to just go hear that.
so you're talking about that little gun with that ball on it, and it
Yeah.
for years. Listen, for years I didn't know what that was. Um, Years ago, when I moved into this place, I had a roommate, and like she left one of those out. I thought it
Oh,
was something
no.
else all this time. I thought it was something else all this time. I'm like, you just gonna leave this out here? Oh man.
She was probably like, yeah, you want to use it? Like,
Wow. I'm glad I didn't say anything because I thought that was something else for a long time.
Great. Yeah, no, yeah. For Chipotle.
Right. It's for oh, that's what y'all are calling it. Cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey, that's not what comes up.
Oh man. But yeah, so that's, I mean, and that's, it's the same thing with placebo effect. So it goes back to that old school. Do you remember that old school experiment that they did where they released the subatomic particles through different slots? It was a slot experiment, right? And they
Hmm.
came out as a splatter on the wall. And then what they observed is that the way how the subatomic particles would attach to the wall was determined on who was observing them.
Hmm.
I mean, that's what we're doing. We're observing ourselves. We're observing ourselves at a subatomic level. What are my patterns? What are my actual behaviors?
Okay. Turning the unconscious, and this is what shadow work is, going into the unconscious and making it conscious.
Yeah.
Interesting when you apply that to it, right? So the split particle experiment, in case anybody doesn't know, I'm sure everybody does by now, but you got these two slits and they're shooting particles through it, and when they don't observe it, it behaves as a wave, which means that when a wave, like think about a pebble dropped in water, when that wave goes through those two slits, you're going to see three uh, interference patterns because it's a wave. But they noticed that when they were watching the whole thing go down, when they were observing the entire process and scrutinizing it from point A to point B, it did not behave like that. And that was the only factor that changed it. It was not a wave anymore. It was behaving as a crystallized particle. So they still haven't found a scientific way to answer that. But in truth, what you focus on crystallizes, what you focus on expands. So take that back into the shadow work and into this spiritual development and all the stuff that we're doing. For our entire lives, there have been aspects of ourselves that we just accepted and never looked at again. All these subconscious influences. Look at the word subconscious, subliminal. It's happening below the conscious level, below the liminal level. We're not paying attention to it. We're not observing it. So all of these influences on the subconscious level are operating as waves, frequencies, right? It would make sense to heal them in their nature, wouldn't it? But when we analyze and pay attention and go within ourselves and start to break this stuff down, we're taking those waves and those frequencies of influence and redirecting them. And now when we go back to our conscious mind, now they're operating in a different direction.
Right. And I think a big portion of that too is recognizing that your emotions have an intelligence of their own.
Mm,
They're not what you think they are. They're a separate intelligence that you need to learn how to crack that code. You got to learn what they are actually speaking.
yes. In other words, they may not always be exactly what you think they are. And what I'm saying is, like, you might be feeling anger, but that might not be anger at the root of it. That might actually be sadness. That might actually be a feeling of abandonment. That might actually be the unmet desire to be protected in a moment of danger.
Hmm. Hmm. But you can only know when you go into that moment, when you face it. And that doesn't always mean that you're recreating the trauma. So, what Brent Baum found was that most of the healing work is done because you're constantly predicting. Most of the healing work is actually, and the points where the people go back into their stuck parts, their stuck aspects, the trigger point happens about 3 to 5 minutes before the trauma actually occurs. So a lot of times when they're reprogramming, it doesn't actually take you to reliving the whole trauma. Now, sometimes it does. Sometimes you are in a moment in the trauma, right? But time slows down. So there's like a point during that you'll get an impression or you'll get a new belief system, but you don't have to revisit the whole thing. It's literally just this moment where time has frozen, where you froze inside of it. And so what they're finding with a lot of people is that it's actually before it happened, or there's a moment that's not directly connected to the trauma that you then create that time slowed down and froze for you, which is why you react the way that you do now, why you keep reliving it over and over again and give it significance.
That reminds me of a story that I read about a therapist that practices what's called clean language. And just to kind of shorten the story, there was a woman who had this OCD, and she would have a panic attack if she couldn't keep the light on when she was asleep. Like she had to have the light on specifically. If it would go out, she wouldn't just get upset or she would go into a panic attack. So going through therapy, just to fast forward through the entire process, it came down to when she was a child, about 4 or 5, and an adult came in and committed a crime against her. But it wasn't the last thing that her mind could latch on to as a moment of the last moment of reality, as it was when that light switch was on. So it's like if the light switch is off, she will always get up and go turn it on. But that just relates to what you were saying as far as how the trigger point is moments before the actual trauma occurs, and
Yeah.
that's in most cases what freezes and develops a complex within us.
Yes. That's in that book, The Body Keeps a Score. They talk about a lot of sexual abuse survivors and how their frozen moments are waiting for the molestation or whatever, for the event to occur. That's when they freeze. It's waiting for it to happen. It's not the moment that it happens. So for a lot of us, that's where our programming is. That's where we get frozen. So we have to, so that is the moment that we reassure, that we give ourselves a new meaning to, so we can move forward. So we're no longer recreating the same situation, because it's in those moments right before that we predict what is going to happen. So now we need to tell ourselves it's safe. You're in the present moment. That's why most of those trigger points and those repeated patterns that we have, that where we keep self-sabotaging or whatever, a lot of times it's not from the trauma itself, it's from the moments leading up to it.
And now I'm thinking about how these repeated behavior patterns and this prediction also well, leads a lot of people, I don't know how many, to choosing partners who, reflect those experiences or reflect those triggers. And
Hmm.
then, not understanding what's going on or how do I keep doing this to myself, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So like there was a an experiment again in that book, The Body Keeps a Score. And it's pretty horrific, so trigger warning, but they would, well, and this is because I'm a dog lover, so I'm like trigger warning. But this these guys did this experiment with dogs where they would keep them in a cage and they would shock them multiple times throughout the day. And um, and then they opened the doors to the cages and they would shock the dogs again. And for the dogs that were completely new, that hadn't had the shocking before while they were in the cage, just that one time when they opened the door and shocked them, those dogs, without the previous experience, just got shocked, they'd freak out, and then they would find a way out of the cage and they would run out the door. But for the dogs that had been repeatedly shocked when the door was closed, even if the door was open, those dogs would still be defecating themselves and whimpering, waiting for the shock to come, even though it wasn't coming and the door was open. So, what they were able to show with this really rough experiment was that these dogs froze, waiting. They were creating a self sabotaging behavior because they had lost hope. They had become aware that, or they had started to believe that that was their cage, even when the door was open. They couldn't see outside of it. They had to be physically removed multiple times in order for them, and then given comfort and words of affirmation and a different environment in order for them to finally start to see that the door is open and that they could leave without being shocked. So that's what they're finding too in our system. And the thing that keeps people going back to the same situation is that they recreate the same environment they were in, they recreate the same scene for themselves because they're unaware of the fact that they are the ones building the cage. The door is wide open, but they're still acting as if the door is closed and they're being shocked still. They're waiting for it. So they're now recreating it, even if the door is wide open. And what makes it difficult is like, I had that situation where now I'm in a relationship that's very healthy that I've never been in before. So all of a sudden, I'm dealing with these new blockages and all this new stuff is coming up, and I'm uncomfortable. It feels like it was safer in the cage almost because it's like, well, this is so unfamiliar to me. I don't have references for this. I don't know what this is. So instead of going back into the fucking cage, right? It's like, okay, well, this is the way out. So let me so let me then analyze where in my body am I feeling this, blah, 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 blah. And this is where I start to unwind what programs I have set myself up with up until this point. Why have my partners been the same way as they were before? What was I registering? What have I been creating for myself? And then once I start changing that on that subliminal level, that's when on my conscious level, all of my reality is changing. All of my environment is changing. I mean, literally down to like, that day after the session, I was riding my bike and I would like see people at the bus stop. And before there would be thoughts of like danger or safe. I wonder what they're up to. Are they doing drugs? Are they, like all these kinds of thoughts would come in my head. And then when I passed them this time around, it was like, oh, they're talking, they're bonding. That's so great. Like, I hope they're really enjoying their conversation. Like, entirely different thought processes started to occur. And this is where I'm saying the attraction thing starts to get heavier because, again, you're putting yourself in alignment with an environment that is actually safe and you're registering it as the present moment. So you're no longer in that frozen response. So you're no longer anticipating something unsafe to occur. Instead, you're able to look at the world with curiosity now and being able to actually explore it for what it is.
Truly reprogramming yourself. So many things to think about.
Oh, yeah. I mean, because then from here, right, you can work on changing belief systems, understanding your values. Like, this is where things get further from here, right? A lot more advanced, because that's when you start going into your value system and reprogramming your values and connections you have to that. When you create a new belief system, then you create a new expectation. And a new expectation means that you're able to see new opportunities pop up when they pop up. And that's when you start getting your desires met and all this. Like, this is where the real magic starts to take place in the conscious realm because you're you're coming at it from an identity level. So you're able to now identify with the world in a different way. And you can do that in every aspect of your life. That's the fun part. Those are the real rituals for sure.
And it's our identity. It's what we identify that sets a frame. And within that frame, there are capabilities that we are capable of. There's beliefs that we believe. There's behaviors that we exhibit. There's environments that we put ourselves in. But it all exists within that frame. So if what's inside that picture in that frame is something that you no longer want, it doesn't really help to change the environment. It doesn't really help to start doing affirmations. It doesn't really help to start doing a yoga pose. It starts at the identity level. You've got to really change what you're identifying with or as. That's going to give you a new box for a new set of beliefs, new set of values, new set of behaviors, new environment.
Yeah. And on a note too, strictly from a neuroscience perspective, you can start the change on the identity level if you're doing your basic needs. Are you eating well? Are you sleeping well? Are you giving yourself warm showers and baths? Are you actively moving? Are you monitoring your breath? These are things that you can do that your neurology that helps actually balance out your neurology so you can even be in a space to contemplate changing your identity. Like literally that's what we need. That's what you can do right now that like we actually really fucking need in order to undertake this journey. Like you're sort of like a base level you got to be on. It's not like you can be in a depression and then just sit in a depression and then just hope for something better. You have to force yourself out of bed. Like you have to push yourself to move. You have to push yourself to eat. You have to allow yourself to sleep. Like there's certain things that your body needs you to do, that your neurology needs you to do in order for you to even be in a space to start changing at the identity level. Because that's what it does too. That is what it does. It feeds your neurology. It feeds those neural pathways. So it's all working in tandem all the time. But yeah, you can't, but like to your point, right? You can't just be like, oh, well, if I just do this mudra every day, I should be fine. Like, are you, do you really believe
Right,
that?
right.
Is that the belief that you have, or is there another belief that you've been living off of that you're just not aware of that you might need to address first?
And that goes back to, hey Trev, what color candle do I use to manifest my rent tomorrow? What demon do I summon to, you know, how do I know if I'm in Yasad? You're thinking about it in a way of isolating the object. This is to be thought about in a series of patterns and relationships. Work with the whole, then you'll see the individual parts change. Mudras are great, but look at the system that mudras come out of. What else comes with that? What are some beliefs that come with that? What are some behavior patterns? Food, clothing, you know, environment. What all comes with that? Maybe those things enhance the effectivity of what color candle you use, of what mudra, etc., etc. It's never the one thing. It's the
Right.
frame. It's the ecology. It's the system.
Yeah. And the more you do it, the more revelation you start to have. Like, this is why they say your first mantra, right? Most people's first mantra is Om. And you hear people practicing that same mantra for like 20 years, right? But it has to work with you. Like for myself, through all those Vedic studies that we did, through all of the meditations that there are, I left with three meditations that I'm still working with for years. It's Antarmana, Tapa Shuddhi, and Tritaka. Those are the three. that I left with out of all of them. That I could do the Shuna meditation, all these other meditations, but those three just reach me on the levels that there's so much clearing that they do that it just continuously replenishes my soul and body and mind. So I'm going to continue working with those. I don't have to do every single one of them. I don't have to, there's going to be certain things that are just going to stick with you and work with you, and you got to just keep working with that then. you know don't trip if Ganesh isn't working for you right now. Maybe you're better off with Lakshmi for right now, or maybe there's some other. You're going to tell yourself what you need.
Right, right. And that goes back to learning how to trust and allow for these things to be what they are, right? Because we talked earlier on about the conscious mind. Oh, you don't really believe that. You're not good enough for that. You might as well give that up. Let that subside. Because here's the thing, and I'm noticing this even when I'm doing these tarot reads every week. Most of the questions that people ask, they've heard that answer in some way, shape, or form. It's just whether or not we accept it. And it happens to me too, right? Hell, I'll get a tarot reading, right? And the answer that I get, it's like, yeah, you're right. You're right. Because I heard it. We are our own guru. We are. It's just a process of learning how to accept that.
I think that's in the yoga book, right? They talk about Raja Yoga, and Raja Yoga really discusses those kinds of mindsets, because that's one way of how you can use buddhi, right? Knowledge. It's like some people you can give them the answer, but they came to you not for the answer. They may
Right.
think they're coming to you for the answer, but they're really coming to you for a reaction, and they don't
Right.
even know it. They just like the drama that comes with it. They don't even know it. They're just, they're getting the same answer from everyone all around. In the end, they weren't there for the answer.
Yeah. I've seen that.
Me
Hey,
too.
Travis, I want to know what you think about this. I already asked this person and that person and this person and this person and this person, and I want to hear what you have to say. Buddy, you should have that answer by now. What?
Yeah.
No. But yeah, you're right.
So we have a guy in our class who, sweet guy, but he's always asking what's next. We'll be practicing a drill and he's doing it terribly, right? Like he's not, his form is off, all kinds of stuff. And he'll be like, all right, so how do I counter all of this? How do I defend it? How do I turn this into that? He's always talking about the next steps. And it's like, boy, how about you work on getting the form for this first?
Hmm.
And I feel like we do that in our magical studies too, right? And in our spiritual work. It's like, yeah, 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 I get there's shadow work and all that stuff, but so you tell me I can really levitate?
Right.
Like, how about you learn how to sit with yourself in a room for 10 minutes first?
Right.
You work with this mantra and find out what it's really about.
It's the human nature. That's why the legend goes that you had to sit outside of the ashram or the temple for X amount of days before they let you in. Because if you would not really about it, you would pack your stuff and go home, which is where you should be. You're not ready for this yet. But if you're somebody that overcomes these initial challenges, you'll find that part of yourself that really wants to find liberation. And that has to be your fuel, not the ego. If the ego is the fuel, number one, you're not going to find what you need. Even if you do, you're not going to accept it. But when that inner light is the fuel, doesn't really matter what happens on the outside world. You're not going to be thrown off course. You
Right.
might get slowed down a little bit, but some of us, you can't throw us off the course. Not even death will stop us.
Yeah. And that's a level of understanding that I think everyone starts off conceptually understanding, but when you practice enough, you have the experiential wisdom of it, right? It's like, so my coach said this, and I think it's amazing. Knowledge is understanding that tomatoes are actually a fruit, but wisdom is understanding that you're not going to put tomatoes in a fruit salad. Like conceptually, we can understand, yeah, it's all internal and stuff like that.
Right.
But when you truly experience what that is, that you're going to then understand what that means, where everything really is internal. You have all of the answers. You really are the genius. You really are a universe. And all of this is just a reflection of that. So this doesn't matter. That's where you start separating from the ego. But the ego, you recognize it's still a tool and it's playing its part as long as it exists here on earth, right? Like it's still playing its part. It's just not in control of your every action. Well, it is, but it's you understand its function a lot better.
Right. Okay. Okay. I'm gonna take a quick break here. Um, Peace and greetings to everybody present in YouTube. I usually give my shout outs and greets, but we kind of just jumped into this thing here. Um, yeah, quite a few people here. If you like this conversation, please hit the like button because, you know, YouTube and all. Shout out to my moderators here, the mighty sword of Ibera. Thank you for swiping the trolls.
Yay.
Yeah, peace, peace. Listen, I'm. I'll be right back. I'll be right back. I'm gonna do what you had to do in the beginning of this video,
Okay,
which is meditate.
right. That
All right,
sounds good. We'll take a break.
we will BRB. I don't know if you could see the chat there, but I mean, you can do what you want. I'll be
Yeah.
back.
Okay. Right, Joan, I'm gonna try to see the chat.
Uh oh.
I'm back.
Uh oh. Left and came back and multiplied.
I expanded. Uh-oh.
Okay.
Shit.
What happened?
Am I back here? Am I still multiplied?
You're recalibrated, reintegrated. Oy vey. Let's see. Oy vey. Oh. Let's see. Practice during the good times sets the baseline at good. Only using tools during trauma, it can gain a negative emotional association. Yeah, that's good info right there. Hell yeah. Ah, almost made a big mess there.
Mhm.
I mean, not with what I was doing, but I went to go make another cup of coffee and forgot that I had like half a cup already. Hoy. All right. Hmm.
So I'm gonna have to go to bed soon.
Okay.
Um, but I would like to, if you have permission, drop a couple of questions or a way that people can, that I've started doing this since that session that has really helped with being to identify and change behaviors within myself. Um, so one of the, okay, well, so sorry. Do I have permission to drop some of these gems
Uh oh.
to
Let's go
spill
ahead
a
and drop
couple
these
of
gems.
these? Okay.
Let's spill some pieces here.
Okay, so when you're first getting into a moment of creating assumption and you're getting a whole bunch of negative thoughts or just getting overwhelmed with thoughts and stuff like that, the first thing you want to do is ask yourself, what else could this be? And the reason why you're doing that is because you are interrupting. You're literally using the law of inertia. You're interrupting that stream of thought that you were having and forcing your neurology to think of something else. And when you do that, you're able to break that pattern. So, what else could this be? Is one of the first questions you ask yourself. So, but if there's something in particular that's bothering you, um, like an emotion, or you want to understand why you're feeling this emotion more, or anything like that, you want to see first of so the question you want to ask yourself is where in your body you're feeling this. Is it inside or outside? Does it have a shape? Does it have a color? What size is it? What temperature it has? And what's its texture? Then, how old might I be when I first felt this? And then, once you go into that and you see the scene that's playing out in front of you, then you ask yourself, if I could change this scene, what would happen? And you allow whatever needs to happen in order to change the scene. Your conscious mind is going to tell you that that's not what happened. Ignore it. Go with what you need to do in order to change that scene and change that picture and continue to play it out. Then you build a frame around that scene and you ask yourself, what colors are really sticking out to you in that frame? What colors? And what texture is that frame? Then you breathe in that frame, you let it saturate your whole body, and then you sit in that, and then that's the class. And you just continue. And what I've done is I've written down those colors in that frame, in the frame, so then I can continue having clear focus on what it is that I'm reprogramming and what colors represent what to me. So then I can continue to envision them surround me and all of that. So I have like my black and gold when I want protection and to feel that magical bliss and that kind of stuff. I have my mossy green for when I feel, for when I want to feel like that comforting need and that kind of stuff. I have my colors kind of set up. So definitely, I would recommend writing them down because you're probably going to do this more than once you start feeling the effects because it's insane the memories that come up. But with some basic beans I could throw out there.
Thank you for the beans.
Yeah.
I mean, just what came up when I closed my eyes and just followed what you were saying was very beautiful. And I can see why I usually surround myself with the colors that I do because it takes me to a place. It reminds me of a place, right? I saw it. Just imagine these clouds instead.
Right. Well, and also this is where we get into that ancestral healing as well, because there's not going to be just one safe place. Our memories change all the time because we're making them up.
Yeah.
So when I'm thinking of my safe place or of a safe and magical spot, it's not always going to be the same spot. Maybe for a while it will be, but there'll be other spots. I know there are other spots that I consider points of safety or whatever, and there are different colors that are associated there that I can then draw into myself. So it's not always going to be the same. That's the beautiful thing is that we really are collections of information and of frequency. And when we tap into that, we recognize that there isn't just one type of feeling. There's a different version of that feeling for that's been going through us for generations. Like it's like there's a collection there that you can pull from.
Another interesting thing that came up while you were talking about how the body keeps a score is it kind of adds a new layer to reading people's body language. When we think about or hear about NLP or reading body language or mind control, we think of doing that to other people, but in truth, its most profound effects are when it's applied to yourself. Because when you think about reading people's body language with micro gestures and where their eyes go and where their hands go and all this other stuff, sure, you can say that there's like a collective baseline that you can roughly apply to everyone. But if you analyze yourself and see, like when you were describing about the physiology being connected to thoughts and patterns, and I was thinking to myself how there are certain things that I do that I have built-in anchors that just automatically fire off. If you could look in the mirror at yourself and see the different anchors that you have developed over time, right? There's a story behind all those. There's a story behind why, you might snap your fingers or you might, I don't know, scratch your chin. Like there's certain things that you do that have a story behind them.
hmm And it's interesting too because again with the mind body connection, we get comfort. So what we also find, going back to the relationship thing where we keep dating same person, different faces, um, we like to say that it's familiar, but there's also the extremist, so law of polarity, right? Like it's kind of like how heat and cold is the same thing, just two different degrees of it. It's like the way how we register it is different, right? But it's the same sensation. It's the same thing with pure with um, pain and joy for us, right? Pain or ecstasy. So, like what they found during wartime, right? A lot of the warriors who were struck down, I think it was in an Italian war they did this study, but they found that during a lot of the operations, a lot of the soldiers who were on the field at that time asked for no anesthesia, even if they were taking their limbs off, because the thrill of that pain, they were still in survival mode. And what they found, so this elicited essentially um, a study conducted where they found that if you have strong enough emotions, you can block pain because you can associate it then with an adrenaline rush with the pleasure form. So, so it's like we're, when we identify like what is causing us pain and what is causing us pleasure, we kind of also have to keep in mind that we might have jumbled the two. And so we might have found power in pain and we have mistaken it for pleasure.
Interesting, because that's a whole world of itself right there.
Yeah, yeah, it's the whole thing. It's the whole thing. I mean, our emotions have their own intelligence, they have their own world. And we're kind of just scratching the surface. Oh, right. So back to like the scratching thing, right? And somatic responses and all of that. So a lot of people will feel um, better. They'll feel enjoyment if they scratch themselves or if they hurt themselves because they're connecting that pain to a pleasure sensation. So it so it's about kind of reprogramming that, right? Like, why am I picking myself? For some reason, it's this texture that's giving me some kind of pleasure here, some kind of reassurance. And then you get into that and you'll be able to unravel that and then reprogram it into perhaps a different gesture or maybe a just different way of relating to the body as a whole.
Hmm. I started to become over the years very perceptive of like micro gestures and micro actions, whether like, you're out in public scratching your butt or picking your nose, like those little things like that. I think that a sign that there's still a lot of work to be done on the unconscious is the fact that you don't realize that you're doing those things.
Yeah.
Well, folks older than me walking through Walmart and Target, digging deep, and I
Yep.
can't imagine any amount of time spent in meditation to like not be aware, or maybe they don't care. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe they let it go. Maybe like, it's just what I'm doing. They've attached a part of their a part of their personality to it. So,
Right,
just kind of like, this is what I do. Got a problem with it. Don't look.
right. This is how I am.
This is my self-acceptance. You know what? Like, if it's working for you, then keep doing it. See, that's the thing too. Like, there's no way that you should be, right?
Right.
It's just what works for you. What gives you the most satisfaction? If you're okay with picking your nose through Walmart or whatever, and it's serving like a pretty good purpose for you, then that's something that you don't need to work on. Like that's, like the rest of us may feel that way, but but you don't
Yeah.
have to, like that's your style, man. Um, yeah, it's kind of because again, you're choosing who you want to be. That's why we're doing this work. We're choosing who we want to be, and we're also discovering who we really are.
as long as we begin to make it a choice, right? A conscious choice.
Yeah.
Because before
Hmm.
it's a conscious choice, we're given a bunch of unconscious choices.
Yeah.
And looking at the people who influenced us to make those choices, you're probably going to want to go back and edit some of them.
You know what? During your shadow work course, um, it was amazing to me to discover the media influence on me. So, like, I didn't realize that I had adopted aspects of Lola Bunny in my personality.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
practiced her enough times, scenes from Space Jam, that like she like became a part, like one of the characters that, or one of the aspects of my personality that I was unaware of before. Like, oh my God, I've been
Hmm.
emulating Lola Bunny. So yeah, I mean, it's incredible when you start digging that stuff up, like who's influenced you and what has influenced you.
Yeah.
That interesting, yeah. It's like a whole bunch of, yeah, very, very interesting what comes up. That's what you're,
Many
yeah,
rabbit holes.
many rabbits.
Hmm. The rabbit hole.
Yeah, no, it's really fascinating. And what's cool too is that once you're aware of that, then also the whole reprogramming thing becomes a lot more fun. Like, because then you also learn how you learn and
Hmm.
how you can change your reality. So, like, when I prepare for my fights and that kind of stuff, now I know that I can choose fighters that I want to see, whose styles that I can see and easily visualize myself doing, and I can study them and start to emulate it. And it's actually in the fight community, that's a very big thing that a lot of them do. They'll be like, I want to fight like this guy, or I want to fight like this girl, or whatever. And they'll start to emulate that. And the risk of it is that you become too much like them. So you have to learn how to differentiate between their style and yours so you can continue to develop your style. But that's like a very real thing, is developing essentially an alter ego that is based off of someone who's done it before that you study. It's a very well known and practiced technique that people use in sports in general. So it's cool when you learn how to pick up information, because then, yeah, then you can implement it in yourself to get better at a skill, to learn a new skill, to learn, you know, to learn how to navigate life in a different way, that kind of situation. I mean, that kind of thing comes about, like, and that's where law of attraction stuff really comes into play, because it's like, how do I act wealthy if I don't have wealth right now? Well, what
Yeah.
does a wealthy person look and talk like? Maybe listen to some like financial podcasts, start doing that kind of stuff. Like, you can literally feel your mind changing, your belief system changing, once you start emulating the and creating the vibrational environment for you to be wealthy, that kind of thing.
I think it's proven at this point that the best way to learn, especially something new, is to find somebody that does it the way that you want to do it and they're doing great, and to model them, to track them, to see or try your best to see how they think, because they've gone through all the hard parts, number one, and number two, through that modeling process you'll see things that you wouldn't have thought about before.
Hmm.
That's got to be the best way to learn quickly.
Oh man, and not just that, but like once you learn too what your somatic responses are, you'll learn how you copy people. Like, I've I realize within myself, when I'm communicating with someone who I want to identify with on a subconscious level, now a conscious level, I'll notice myself start changing my posture to fit theirs. Like, I'll be like, man, they were leaning on one side, now I'm leaning on one side.
Yeah.
they were stretching this way. Now I'm stretching this way. Like, that's interesting how that just occurred. Like, you'll see how you start syncing up with people. So if you're learning from someone, right, who's already accomplished in whatever it is you want to gain, you'll start noticing and you're aware of how you start copying postures and gestures. You'll be aware of the gestures from that person that you're starting to copy, and then you can program that gesture.
Yeah. It's automatic, and I would even say it's natural. Because think about what we were saying about the trigger, or not, yeah, the triggers and the anchors and the different physiology. Because I know that there have been times in my past where I've had a hero of some sort, and I didn't have much intel on them, but what I was able to choose from that small selection of what I saw on TV or a clip or whatever. And even through that, I could find something that I could take and adapt into my personality. And it might not have been much. It may have been the way that they said something, or maybe a posture position or whatever. But to me, it felt like, I was not, I wasn't thinking in these words here, but I was in alignment with that individual and I was being like that individual. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's a natural process. And if it helps you to continue to sync up with what you're trying to absorb, like the man scratching his ass in Walmart, I don't see a problem with that if it's done with intent, right?
Right. Yeah, intentional. If you are intentional with your actions, you will have the best results, even though it may not feel like it. Like, I've been experiencing that in sparring recently, right? Like, I feel like I'm getting, it's so interesting. I had a round the other day. It was a 3 rounds, with the same person. And so the first round and the second round, I spent my time on the defense and thinking about countering very intentionally, trying to figure out what the other person is doing and what they're attacking me with. And I got hit a lot, right? Like, the whole time I'm just like, oh, yeah, oh, okay, defense. And then, like 1 or 2 counters or something like that. So the first and second round, I was like, oh, that sucks, but I probably lost those two. And then the third round, I'm just gonna like let it all out. And so in the third round, I implemented my plan, and the guy adjusted. Um, so then it made it a little bit more challenging, but in the end, like, I felt pretty good about that last round. When we were in a circle discussing it, the guy brought up, he said, yeah, Alora kept landing all of these really precise, good hits on me in the first and second round. I felt like I couldn't even breathe through it. And I was like, man, I thought that was my weak round. But because I was so intentional with what I was throwing, even though I felt like I was getting beat up to the outside environment, that was when I was the most focused and the most dangerous. So to the other person who was my direct opponent, who I was allowing to hit me, they they felt like it had no effect upon what I was imposing on them. And the only difference was that I was intentional with my actions.
Hmm.
So if we bring that into our spiritual practice, right? It's like, you may feel like you're not getting anywhere, but man, when you put intentionality into it, you're actually getting a lot farther than what you can give yourself credit for.
That's good. That's good right there. And look, right? Look at the mind trying to predict what's going to happen next, right? And
Yeah.
that I think that story that you described connects with faith, with those intentional actions, right? You're stepping ahead now. You're coming forth with your plan, with your story, with your frame, and you are living it out. Now, despite what the environment is showing you and telling you, you have to maintain your frame to the end. And what you came to find after discussion, because hey, look, in real life, we don't always get those round table
Yeah.
discussions, right? We just
Mm-hmm.
have to deal with it. Sometimes we find out years later.
Mm-hmm.
But what you can focus on now is the faith that you have during those intentional actions, because that is going to shape how you move throughout the process. If you weren't confident with your plan, I don't think that he would have said what he said.
Right. Absolutely. And that's where, a lot of people will say circumstances don't matter because
Yeah.
they're because you understand that there's going to be resistance. But if you remain focused, it's not going to be the main part of your gameplay. It's like, yeah, of course that's going to be there.
Yeah. That's
It's not the main part of the story, though.
that's a hurdle that I've crossed a few times, and I see that there's levels to it. Like that understanding that we're talking about here. For me, it was one that was that resulted in me having a lack of confidence in life, right? Because I was looking around and judging my process and my progress based on what other people were saying and doing and how I looked in the eyes of others, which was not best for me.
Yeah.
But I've learned multiple times at higher levels that I have to set that frame. I have to go out with a plan and I have to do it and trust that it's going to work. Trust the process. I remember I was afraid to do live streams, because I thought that I looked like an idiot, but I did it anyways. And I found over time people were like, "Oh, Trav, that was very helpful. That was enlightening." And I realized as long as I focus on what I'm supposed to be doing and not on what people are thinking, it's going to come out right. I
Yeah.
crossed that hurdle again with tarot. I didn't do tarot for a long time, not publicly, but I recently started doing it. And what I found was there was an anxiety that I've had since forever that I started doing tarot was, oh, well, they're going to look at this and say this is wrong and this is stupid, doesn't make any sense. But I started doing it anyways, right? And I haven't gotten that response. And even if I did, as long as I focus on the message instead of trying to impress somebody or make something sound good, there's been quite a few readings that I did, and I'm like, oh, this doesn't make sense to me. But then the other person will chime in, holy shit, that was accurate as fuck.
Mhm.
So it is it's all about focusing only on the plan, the purpose, the intention, not on the distractions whatsoever.
Right. And what you said there too is kind of the base root for most of our behavioral responses. We, a lot of times, regardless of what happens, the root issues of our negative belief systems come from feeling rejected,
Hmm.
feeling like we're not enough.
Hmm.
So we're constantly looking for validation from each other. Like that's just going to be one of those resistances that we're just going to have to face and minimize. Like that's part of the path. That's part of the path. And it's like when you talk to those really crazy computer tech geeks, and they'll be like, and you're like, man, don't you ever get frustrated? And they're like, well, I know as soon as I start working on this system that something's gonna go wrong. But like whatever, that's not part of it. I'm going to figure this out, right? And they go back in with the focus. They understand that if it's old software, there's going to be some old shit that they're just going to have to deal with, but they're not going to let that derail them from the project that they have at hand, right? It's the same with us. Like all of us are going to have to deal with the feeling of rejection because again our ego, right, is constantly trying to validate the image that's playing in our head, the scenes that are playing in our head, or change what it's seeing out here to try and fit what we want in here. So it's constantly going to be looking for that validation. And that's the root of most of our fears. Like, literally, for pretty much almost all of us, what they're finding on a consistent basis is that every base native belief system has to do with some type of feeling of being rejected or of not being enough or of some kind of fear because we're going to be excluded from some type of group. So that's, I mean, what you're saying right there is more common than what I think we give credit for. I think that we kind of have a habit of telling ourselves, like, oh, that's just a me thing. It's like, no, that's a human thing. That's a living entity thing. Because we also want to be bonded with one another, right? Because in the end, we're all from the same source. And we recognize that on a sub level. So we're always trying to connect, always. So, but the only way that you can truly see your reflection in somebody else is if it comes from in here. So that validation from the outside is really not rational. It's not a good base foundation to have. It's got to come from within here. You have to recognize that, like, I am with you, you are within me, that kind of shit. But that's the path that we're on. I mean, that's the path is building unity. So, of course, while we're doing that, we're going to be coming up with that resistance of, people are going to judge me. I'm going to have this happen. I have this kind of fear, whatever, whatever. There's going to be more separation.
Well, I'm gonna judge you right now. Um, it's been a while, and I'm really happy that we had this discussion. I can actually really see the growth that you have gone through. I'm sure it's been going on for a while, but you certainly taught me something tonight. This was an awesome conversation the whole time through. Um, Hell, I thank you for being here, talking with
Yeah.
me.
Well, thank you for talking with me too. I'm really glad that we can still like set each other off and like it's for sure. It's so
Yeah,
nice because I mean, you're a teacher, right? So it's like it's not like I feel like I have to keep up, but I do feel like I need to be an honorable student. And like, so sometimes I'll be on my path and I'll be like, God, I hope I can still talk to Trav at the end of the day.
I think
Because
you'll be all right.
yeah, yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about it for sure. But yeah, it's interesting what kind of what the path is, right? Because when you start learning all of this stuff, it's like there's so much information. You're like, yeah, I'm gonna do this, and then I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna do that. And then your life starts to change. And then when life starts to change, it's like, okay, now I'm just going to focus on this. And now I'm going to just focus on this. But, I should be doing this. But I just can't find the willpower right now. I'm just going to keep focusing on this or whatever. And then you get carried away. And then you come back and you think, okay, well, now I'm going to definitely be focusing on this. But you can't. But from all the information that we've learned, it's like, okay, I don't think I'm asking the right questions. Let me ask myself some questions. Am I putting an expectation on myself because during that time what worked for me then, I'm thinking that it's going to work for me now? Maybe I need a different system here. What else should I dive into? Let me revisit some of this stuff. And then when you kind of revisit those fundamentals, you can start to find your path again. Like for myself, it was, my big revelation recently was realizing that I think that the next portion of my path is going to be really exploring what mind body soul connection is. Like, that's going to be the focus. That's the focus. That's where it needs to be right now. So, all of my meditations, everything's kind of drawn back into that focus from understanding like there's a mind body soul connection here. What is that? And then you start realizing that all of your practices beforehand were also reflections of that. All of the astral work I was doing, all the fun shit that we were doing, and all of that, that was the observations that I was getting from that was literally how does that connect to my mind and my body? How is that affecting my reality here? Right? So you start recognizing your karmic path with all of the shit that you do. But it takes time and it takes that allowance, like we're talking about, with just being able to explore, fade out, come back in, but always stay consistent. Like, always stay consistent with learning, always stay consistent with some practice from it, right? Like, there was even a point where I wasn't doing antarmona, and then the next time I picked it up, I did it for the first time unguided. And then since then, it's been like I get no fulfillment out of guided meditation. Like, I have to do it unguided now because it's like, no, I know the process and I know how long I need. to be able to fully process what's going on and observe my thoughts and all of that stuff. So it's like it's almost like you take a break, you fall off it, and but if you remain consistent and you have the knowledge, you can't ever really go back. So you just kind of pick up where you left off, but you have a new perspective and you have a new understanding of like where your next jumping off point is, essentially. Like even for the dreaming now, it's changed, right? It's like my relationship with that has changed. So it's it's very, very cool. It's like I'm so grateful to be a student of yours because I think like without this information, I honestly think I would just be super lost. Super lost. But because through these courses and through these book studies and all of these conversations, we were able to connect those dots. There's always a place where you can start from, even when you feel lost. There's always a place where you can start, and that will give you clarity, that will shine a light on the next step that you got to take. Like for some of us, that's going back into Ophiel. For some of us, that's going back into Kabbalah. For some of us, that's sticking with the Vedic stuff. For some of us, it's a mix, like it's just, it kind of, but at least we have these resources and these options. So we know when we're tapping into ourselves, what we can do and what works best for us at that point, and we can trust that. And so thank you for being the teacher that you are, for sure. For sure.
My pleasure. Wait, wait. All right, all right. So I'm sure you've got to start getting ready for the next
Yeah,
thing.
for the
Really
yeah,
nice
for the
to
next
catch you.
adventure.
Right. Nice to catch you fresh out of the process, and I'd love to see what you're gonna do next. There were some other things that I won't say here that I was really impressed with. I mean, seeing that you figured a specific thing out. I don't want to say it here just yet. I'll say it afterwards. But you figured a specific thing out, and you're doing it so well. Um, yeah, keep doing what the hell you're doing. It's cool to be on the other side. I'll say that much.
Nice. Oh, thank
Um,
you.
was there anything else that you want to say to the people in Major Society, YouTube land, the random observers, the consistent observers?
Um, just that I'm grateful to everyone. I think that it's so easy, and I think I'll just always keep saying this because I think all of us here have felt in a room full of people still very lonely. And this is a community where we can actually be with like-minded people, where we can share our thoughts, where we can share our experiences, and it's welcomed and it's accepted, and we can all grow from it. And so I just really appreciate everyone here who's been my friend throughout all of this for sure. Um, yeah, you guys, I think we're all very healing for one another. So thank you very much.
All right, beautiful space.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, it is getting late, and once again, thank you for being here. Have a great night. And I mean, is there a place that you want people to come check you out or anything? Or
I mean, there's my Instagram. It's connected to yours. I do have my YouTube channel. Um, so my Instagram is Alcolmea, Alcolmeia. And the in my YouTube channel, if you look up Alora, like Tatva Shooty by Alora or anything like that, it'll come up. Um, yeah, and there's some videos on there. I'm not very good at updating the videos yet. I'm getting better at it. Um, but for sure, my Instagram, I'll be there on a couple of group chats, so I have I have to be on that thing. So if you have questions, you can hit me up. I'm also part of the Magus group in the Mighty app. So I'm in one of the chats. So I've had a few people like hit me up separately in those chats, and I'll check those too. So if you want to converse or whatever, um, you can find me there for sure.
All right, all right. All right, so that concludes today's wonderful discussion. As always, I hope that you got something out of this that you can put to practical use. And we'll see you next time. I should be going live. What is today? Thursday? Friday? Saturday, we resume the book study of the Cosmic Doctrine. You know what time it is. Super deep, super dope. May the 5th approaches for those of you who are ready to go forth the second round of Cyclomancy and the reopening of the Shadow Work class with new material. This all begins Sunday, moving forward. So if you want to be a part of that, this will be your opportunity to take advantage of it. All right, all right. So you'll have a great night. I appreciate you being here. This is TK Trav, aka Travis Magus, here with LVX777. I love you. Peace.
Bye.